Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I thought it would be nice for us to do a deep dive on this Mirage Orb fiasco, and I want to try to explain to people why it is that the community is feeling the way they are. And so in hopes that if any developers watch this, if any community team members watch this, hopefully you'll get a better understanding of why it is. And on top of that, how can you go about addressing this / fixing this when it comes to having an understanding? And part of me almost feels like sometimes, when you're speaking to people that, or you're speaking to anyone that is from a different area, a different country, sometimes there's cultural differences in how you may approach business practices or how you may approach the way you communicate with people, how you try to understand where a certain culture or community is coming from in their reaction versus another. And if anything, I would just like to try to explain this as best I can by showing screenshots, by showing official posts that have been made, and trying to tie everything together. So let's first give you the TLDR on what's actually happening with Mirage Orb. So a number of days ago, or however long ago we should say, it started becoming popularized that Mirage Orb was performing very well. Shout out to Guns, because I think he did a video on this and a number of others. There were screenshots that were being shared in Gen Chat. And basically it was, hey, this is performing really well. And bear in mind, I'm, summarizing, if you will, or paraphrasing. And then we end up seeing a change that was made, or better yet, found out, more specifically, by community members that saw that the damage output, whether that be at all levels, certain levels, we'll get to that in a moment, was basically lowered. And there was no announcement, there was no hotfix, there was no in-game system mail, nothing. It was just changed. And most of us are privy to this because, respectfully, we have to call it what it is, right? And we don't have to be mean about it. We can just simply say, with what we know is the truth, is that there have been shadow changes that have been made in the game. This is not anything new. I think the hope is always that they won't happen and that we'll get to a better place, a continuously improving place with how those are announced and communicated prior to changes. And we'll talk about that and touch on that in a moment as well. And so this happens, community starts getting an uproar. Bear in mind, most of the people that are really impacting, again, we have to kind of be fair on both sides. Most of the people, players, that are, I would imagine, in uproars over this are those that are spending money, right? And or those that maybe have invested gems, etc., right, into kind of getting as much investment out of Mirage Orb. But let's just say, for minimum purposes, it's those that are spending to get it. Now, some people have spent a range of hundreds of dollars, right, in order to get this, especially when you started seeing reports coming out of how well it was performing. More people started investing in this as well. And then you have this shadow change that happens, no announcement, no prep time, nothing. So, let's really break this down and simplify. You have people that have invested money into something, which appeared to be from them, right? I don't think anyone, I didn't hear anything that was being talked about or anything that was mentioned to me, right, in my limited outreach or my outreach that I have, of people saying, yeah, this is totally bugged. It's performing so much better than it should be. Let's just keep riding this out. Like, I didn't see or hear anyone talk about that. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Maybe it did. I just wasn't privy to it. And so they invest this money thinking, oh, this is great. This is an awesome artifact, right? Whether they were saying it was competing with Goldcrest or it's around there. It's nice for Mage to be able to have something, whatever the view may be. And then all of a sudden, it's nerfed. And you have people that are like, oh, this is a great artifact. They're investing. It's fantastic. Its output is lovely. And then the nerf comes in and there's no announcement. That's obviously going to rub people the wrong way. And rightfully so it did. And then after that, there was a recent in-game announcement, which I haven't read yet. I'll probably do a video on that later. They appear, right, from some screenshots I saw, we'll show that in a moment, to bring it back up to some power, and we'll show you that now. So now we're going to go over to Discord, and I'm going to show you, and I don't think Celos is going to mind, pretty good guy, or I should say person, don't know if it's a guy or girl, I didn't ask, but Celos provided me some screenshots and gave me some clarity. So there's two screenshots you're seeing here. One is on the 4th of March, one is on the 6th of March. The 4th of March was after the nerf slash bug fix, right? That was their claim from the devs, is that, hey, this is a bug fix on levels 4 and 5, I think it was, and that it wasn't originally intended to be that, right? To be that strong is what the claim is, and that was stated in in-game system mail as well. And then we get this, and you can see from Celis where he says, where they say that March 6th was when they changed it to 6,000 damage factor as of 8 hours ago. The previous 9K damage factor against the level 44 Warlock, so it was March 4th, after they had nerfed the originally released artifact. And I'm going to show you that here as well for when that happened. So if we go and we take a look here, let's do this, boom. So you can see, here's the date, January 23rd, 2024, on a Tuesday, was when Mirage Orb, specifically I should say on the 24th is when it was technically released, right? Planning to add new content in the next patch. This was 1.0.22, and you could see new artifact, Mirage Orb, right? So the orb has been out a month and a half, right? And we get now, and we'll head back to Discord for a sec, because I'll be showing you guys some other stuff here in a moment. But let's just hang out. It's always nice to just see Gen Chat, flourish, if you will. And so now we get to a point where, like I said, the first big point to really mention is that the change happened before an announcement was made. That was the first mistake and the first hurdle that the team opted for. That, like we said, is going to rub people the wrong way, right? You don't make hidden changes and shadow changes, especially when you already have a history of doing that. And history has already shown that the community doesn't like when that happens. This has happened multiple times, and at this moment, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the definition of insanity, right? You're doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. There's no reason why we would expect different results. And you would like to believe that as a development team for a game, this would be understood because they've seen this already happen firsthand, right? This isn't as though it was the first time it happened, which maybe you could feign some ignorance, or you could feign, we just weren't really aware, whatever it may be. But there's none of that now. And so that's really what makes it that much more hurtful. It sucks. To me, this is sad that this happened. And it's one of those things which, again, is very easily correctable. We're going to talk about some of those fixes as well. So then we get, like I mentioned, kind of the number of shadow changes that have happened, right? The last big one was when they were making those changes with the alliances and not being able to join other alliances that are in other zones, right? I think this was from S2 Plus season going onwards. Maybe it's been applied to seasons before that. I haven't vetted that yet, if we're talking about Vanilla Season 2 or Season 1. But that happened along with the fact that they limited now the movement, right? Where once you get to 2 Plus and beyond, you can only resurge within the first week, or you have to wait for the Unscarred Augerstone chapter, which is one of the last chapters in Augerstone, to finish, and then you can go ahead and move around to any region, right? And that was probably the last big one before others as well, where that got a lot of people in an uproar. So we already talked about this, right? Where players invested money into the artifact, the nerf or slash fix, right, as they call it, came out. And this was because, like I said, I'll briefly say this again, they claimed that, or they stated, not claimed, that the artifact was not in line with what it should have been, and that they were making a correction. The challenge with this, for me, just like we showed you, is that the artifact's been out for almost a month and a half at this point. And to me, there's two things that stick out here. Number one is that, are you appropriately testing artifacts, materials, resources, if you want to say artifacts, heroes, etc., legions, basically new things that are being introduced? Are you appropriately and properly testing them before release? And then, even if something slips by, which maybe it can, I think that's realistic to assume that they're probably not going to catch everything. After it's introduced, are you doing follow-up on those newly introduced features, items, etc., to make sure that they are in line with what you had originally intended? right? Are you checking on it for the first week, 2, 3, 4 weeks? Are you where you're doing more of a deep check? And then are you doing more light checks or like routine checks where maybe, you look at it once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month, right? But maybe for the first few weeks, you're monitoring it a lot, very closely to make sure that it is acting and reacting in the way that it should be. Because to me, that feels like 2 opportunities there to basically vet yourself, right? To audit yourself on how Mirage Orb could have already been in line when it was introduced, and then you would never have this issue to begin with. Right? I think that's fair. And then we get to the part where it hurts players, because when you have actions like this that continue to happen, and there's been a trend of them happening, it starts to lead people to potentially slow down spending, stopping spending. It cautions people, right? It kind of raises everyone's alert level on, well, I think it's fair to say, which some people have, when's the next shadow nerf coming? What's the next thing that's going to be nerfed? Why would I invest money into a game if I don't know what kind of massive changes could be happening? And that's fair to say. Just as much as on the other side of the fence, it's fair from the developer standpoint of saying, well, no, this was actually just a bug. We missed it. We apologize for it. Here's some compensation, right? We'll continue working to doing better going forward. And that's fair as well. The challenge is that even though both sides can be right, it doesn't change the fact of what it does. It doesn't mean that the developer should look at the community and say, you shouldn't feel that. And I'm not saying they are. Just, again, generally speaking, it's recognizing that what they believe, what we believe, and how we feel is a truth, just as much as what they believe can be a truth as well. But that doesn't mean that we should, that people shouldn't react the way they are. They're fair to react how they are. As long as it's, civil-ish, right? And respectful. It's okay to voice your opinion. It's okay to voice that you don't like what's happening. It's okay to say you're going to do this or you're going to do that, right? Again, within reason. And that's where you get to a point that is escalated where it has now, because this has continued to happen for multiple times. And bear in mind, this is something that is fully on the game, it's fully on the dev team, and it's also fully within their ability to correct and to fix these things, as they've stated already. And so now I want to get to a dev column, and I want to show this off because this really hammers home, right? This came out, this was a post that NASTi made. Let me also be clear here, right? Regardless of who's making the post, this does not mean that, NASTi is the one in charge of doing that, right? Please do not take it as such. And also please be civil with, again, none of these people should obviously be receiving any hate. Keep in mind there's messengers and then there's decision makers, right? And that's always something that people should understand, right? So you're not killing the messenger is my point. So NASTi posted this on Thursday, December 28th, 2023 at about 5:30 a.m. local for my time. And it says, in this developer Q&A, we would like to explore some of the recent hot topics in the community and share our plans to addressing them. Recently, there's been some changes in the game that were not mentioned in any announcements. Will you make sure that announcements notify players of all changes before we notice them ourselves? That's basically exactly what we have happening now. We've always maintained that changes should never be hidden from players. We've recently found that communication between various internal teams was not optimal, resulting in some changes being omitted from announcements, and we'd like to extend our sincerest apologies. So far, and like we talked about it before, this seems like a reasonable explanation. Moving forward, we will track all changes more carefully, improve the flow of information between and among our teams, and increase the level of transparency with players so that this communication failure doesn't happen again. That's a bold statement. We also welcome your continued feedback during this process. Again, this was articulated well. The way that this was written is basically anything and everything you would want to know as a player. It addresses and gives you a viable explanation, a reasonable explanation for why some of the communication flow was not disseminated and communicated appropriately. And it makes a declaration that states what will not happen again. And then we get to where we're at now. And again, this is not me bashing the game. This is not me bashing the devs. This is me looking for accountability, making sure that we have a historical reference and we have a responsibility to make sure that there is awareness to this in an appropriate way. The fact is that the ball is in the developer's court, right? This is in the game's court. They have the ability to make these changes, to make these corrections, to improve and to be better. It is at this point in time, and I think this is fair to say, it's a choice, right? They can choose to do it or they can choose not to do it. Now, this is something, and let me explain kind of how I would go about doing this process, is that if you have different internal departments, right, you simply put have to have someone, a group of people, or a team that does the final sign-off on any changes or implementation decisions that are being made. I think that's fair to say. And from there, internal departments that are submitting changes or submitting changes for approval, right, would all kind of filter and funnel and go somewhere. And then those can be reviewed and assessed, and then you would have a communications department that coordinates with the department prior to, right, that would be like the final say department. You coordinate with them and you say, look, we're going to put this out. Here's the announcement, and then we'll make the change at this appropriate time. This is also when you would consider how to do forms of compensation. I think something that's fair in this kind of a situation where based on the percentage of power for Mirage Orb that you're decreasing it by, you would refund the amount of keys based on that percentage. So let's say as an example, and you would just do this player by player, right? You would say if someone or like anyone who's maybe purchased it, right? And anything that you would be using that specifically goes to Mirage Orb, you would say, okay, well, if it's, and I'll use very easy numbers here. Let's say it's producing 100,000 damage and you've nerfed it in half. Okay, well then you would look at players' accounts and either how much money they spent and or how many keys they spent, and you would maybe say, okay, let's just refund or compensate them 50% of the keys or 50% of something that they've spent. Or if you want to scale it a little bit lower than that because maybe they pulled other things outside of Mirage Orb, etc., whatever it may be. But my point overall is look at how you can compensate people appropriately, because bear in mind, if you do that, this will only ever be taken as a great thing. No one's going to look at the developer and say, oh my God, how dare they compensate me back based on the amount of power that they lowered in the Mirage Orb artifact and giving me back an equal compensation percentage or close to in keys, vouchers, credits, whatever it is. No, they're going to say, you know what? I really appreciate that they were humble and they were honest and they were upfront enough to recognize, okay, you know what, this wasn't done the as far as communication-wise the best way it should have been. But when it comes to compensation, we're also going to make sure that if we make an adjustment like this, bear in mind, this isn't like it was a 5% change, right? And what's always funny about these things is notice how when you make changes to heroes and artifacts, when there's small percentage changes, remember, we've talked about this before, when I would review patch notes, and I've always applauded the developers as I've continued to, when it comes to when they release patch notes and they make adjustments to heroes, to talents, to artifacts, etc., most of the time they are making small percentage or damage changes on a buff or a nerf. Nothing that's incredibly drastic. And you notice how nobody really gets up in arms and asks for compensation when that happens, but you do have it when you make major changes, right? Regardless if it's a fix or it's a nerf, when things are not communicated appropriately, that's where the challenge is. On top of when things are not corrected at the earliest possible opportunity to recognize that Mirage Orb needed to be corrected based on what was initially said from them, it should have happened earlier rather than later. And when you let things go on for as long as they did, right, without addressing it, whether it was noticed or not, you can make a fair argument that says, okay, well, fair compensation at that point is most likely needed. And then if that happens, you won't get this uproar. Like, just imagine if they wrote an announcement that said, hey, everyone, and obviously I'm very simplifying here. You know, they say, hey, COD community, we've recently noticed internal reports that are showing that Mirage Orb is performing at a higher rate than it was originally intended. We do apologize that we haven't captured this, that we were unable to capture this earlier. But at this time, within a few days, we plan to correct this and lower its damage where it'll be performing more in line with what was originally intended. The expected changes will be as follows. Because of this, because it was caught late, because the changes are big numbers, decent numbers, we will be compensating players that have invested into this artifact as such. And then you go kind of one by one. They did this when they did the war pet changes, and they gave compensation for war pets, right? We were having a conversation about this, and Sneaky had brought that up in our COD VC on the Discord, on the official Discord. So again, they've set a precedent of being willing to do this. This is just something that if you did an announcement like that before the change, you would have basically no uproar. And that's why I talk about it's very important the way that we communicate to the community and being able to understand why this is so important to the community. And these are very easy changes. These are easy fixes. These are not difficult to do, but it does require a form of cross-department engagement and, if needed to, improving some of the internal processes within the business. And so that's how I would go about doing the fixes, like I mentioned. And then we get to the last part that I'm going to talk about, which is the next couple months. I truly believe, as has been stated by a number of other people within the community, that the next couple months I think are going to be very imperative. I think they're going to be very crucial, very important to the future of Call of Dragons and how players feel about it. Though there has been, and let me be clear here as well, there has been a number of things that the developers have listened to from us and implementations that have been made. There's also been a number of things that, a number of changes that have been made, which probably did not have like majority support or overwhelming support from the community. And then there's the kind of gray area right in the middle, which is, you know, just an update that comes out or patch notes that come out for changes, and then you're just kind of waiting to see how people react to them. I believe that depending on how the next update plays out, how the next couple months look, once we finally get to Season 3, once we get Home Kingdoms, once we get cross-season migration, I think after that's released, and then we allow that maybe a month or two, give or take, maybe another season after that to marinate, I think it's going to be pretty clear on, I don't know if I say clear, but I'll say it will be more of an indication on the future direction of the game. And are we able to start seeing some of these fixes, some of these opportunities that are being taken advantage of in a good way, right? Meaning that, you know, these things are being acknowledged and being done and being actioned going forward. And yeah, those are my thoughts. So that's it. And like I said, in conclusion, this, as I mentioned throughout the video, right, the reason I love talking about these things so much is because I like to view them as opportunities, right? These are learning opportunities as much as they are, speaking to what some of the challenges are. And as I hopefully have done an okay job of articulating, you'll notice that throughout this video, again, we didn't call anyone out. We didn't say, how dare you? We didn't point any fingers. We just simply spoke to the facts. And then I gave you my thoughts and my opinion on that. And I think that's important. I think we need that availability to do that, right? Whether we're content creators or we're players, but again, doing it hopefully in a respectful way and in an appropriate and a civil way, right? We don't need to be, swearing or throwing out derogatory language or, issuing out hate speech to anyone, whether it's the developers or community members, right? We can do things in an appropriate way and still get the same points across. With that in mind, I would love to hear from you. If you're in the community, again, on anything I touched on, do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts? Do you have your own views? Do you want to touch on something maybe I missed out on? Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I'll catch y'all later.